Welcome everybody for another episode of Mondays with Mundy, and that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Legacy Foundation. And if you've been watching these episodes for the last 2 years, yes, it's been that long, you've noticed that we've done a few about art. We've talked about new paintings in the collection. We've talked about my favorite paintings or sculptures called Jim's Picks. But what we haven't done is talked about where do you hang a painting in a building and what decisions are made to determine that. And we had that issue in the last few weeks at the League because we have another painting, a new painting, portrait coming into the collection at the end of the year. And so that prompted us to create this game of if A, then B, then B, then C, and do we have room for one more painting? So let's get started and see how we solved the problem. I think it's actually a lot of fun myself. So, and I hope that you'll enjoy it as well, because it really was a lot of fun. So here we go. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, I'm calling it. There's got to be room for one more, I hope. All right, so this is the lady that started it all. All right, Lucretia Mott, the 19th century Philadelphia Quaker suffragette and abolitionist, who with her husband James Mott owned a farm called Roadside in what is today Cheltenham Township, or Elkins Park. Back then it was called Cheltenham Hills, I believe. Although I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, as they should. So if you go north on Broad Street from the Union League House and go all the way to the north end, you go across Cheltenham Avenue into Montgomery County, and immediately on the left-hand side was the Mott farm called Roadside. That's where the house was, right by the road. Now it's called Latham Park, I believe. And it was on part of the farm that the Motts leased land to the federal government, on which they placed Camp William Penn, the first training camp in American history for Black soldiers. All right, because the Union League at this point is at the forefront, and is the League is the first organization to receive permission from the federal government to raise United States colored troop regiments, as they were known in the 19th century. And so they needed a place to train. Camp William Penn was it, and it was on the Mott farm. So, as you may have seen episode, we've also just a year ago this month, in September of 2021, we added a portrait of Frederick Douglass. And the two of them, Mott and Douglass, worked together with the League to create and raise and train these 11 USCT regiments at Camp William Penn. So that's how this all got started. Okay, all right. So here's the first floor hallway in the Broad Street building. The door is behind me, so I'm looking west down the hall, and I apologize for sometimes the cell phone camera works well and sometimes it doesn't. So, but anyway, let's move to a better photograph. And here we go. So this is the left-hand wall that we're just looking at on the south side of the hallway. And from right to left, we have the Douglass portrait that was unveiled last September 2021. On the far right, we have a painting called 3 Medals of Honor that was commissioned by the then Abraham Lincoln Foundation and unveiled in June of 2013 to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the founding of the United States Colored Troop Regiments in Philadelphia by the League. And it depicts the 6th USCT Regiment, trained at Camp William Penn in its first major engagement called the Battle of New Market Heights on September 29th of 1864. So, and then in the center, we have a painting by Philadelphia artist Joseph John called Harvest Home When the War Was Over. And it's a beautiful tableau about these post-Civil War scenes that, and it shows how families are affected. So there are children, there's a young family where the boys are playing with their father's sword and musket, or there's a bride about to marry her soldier groom, and there are veterans playing cards, and there's a disabled veteran who lost his leg. And so there's all kinds of stuff in there. It's a really great painting. But where to put Lucretia Mott? So the idea then was to take the Joseph John painting, hang it someplace else in the League House, move the Troiani to the right and put it in the center. And then where it hangs now, we will hang the Lucretia Mott portrait, because after all, Lucretia Mott, Frederick Douglass, Camp William Penn, USCTs in the middle, it all made sense. Bingo, done. Okay. But now the fun begins. All right, so where do you hang a big painting? Because the Harvest Home is roughly 6 feet tall by 8 feet wide with frame. And so we go up to the second floor of the Broad Street building, along the Broad Street line, actually, into what used to be the original library, but now called the McMichael Room. And so Broad Street is behind me to my back. We're looking at the west wall, the doors to the right. So to the left, we have Moravian Street. So again, the south side of the building. And we have two large paintings there, and they will both get placed someplace else, because not only do we have the Lig house in which to hang paintings, but we also now have other properties, specifically the Union League Golf Club at Torresdale, where we have had paintings since 2015, and now the new golf at Liberty Hill in Lafayette Hill, which just opened this year and in the spring of this year. And they don't have any paintings, but they could use some. And what better thing to do than hang paintings that say, this is the Union League of Philadelphia. So the one on the left in this photograph called Bringing in the Hay by the Belgian artist Alexandre Véron is also 6 feet by 8 feet. And it just so happens that there is a really big wall at Liberty Hill that can handle it. So let's see what that looks like. There you go. All right. Now, just so you know, though, the Mott portrait won't get hung on the Broad Street wall until January of 2023. So this wall will stay as is until that time when we'll move Bringing the Hay up to Liberty Hill. And in the meantime, there's another painting on the right-hand side. It's the Grand Canal in Venice by Jean-Baptiste van der Moor, a Belgian artist. And it is 4 feet by 6 feet, including the frame. We have two Grand Canal scenes in the League house as it is, and the other one is in a much better location. It's an overmantel in the library lounge. And so this one would fit perfectly up at the Torresdale Clubhouse. So that will move there eventually. So here we go. Here's the ballroom at the Torresdale Clubhouse. Now on this wall in 2015 were two paintings. One called On the Field of Honor by Francois Flameng, and the other one was called George Washington presenting Governor Dinwiddie's letter to the Chevalier de Lagardelle at Fort Le Boeuf. That's a mouthful, I know, but they both fit perfectly. And more importantly, they both had wooden frames that were, which replaced the original 19th century frames in the 1950s, because these paintings hang rather low. And there's always a chance that the frame could get bumped. And if we use a 19th century composition frame, it's a lot of money to repair it. So we're almost there. So we took those two paintings out because they're going to go someplace else, because they've been on that wall since 2015. And we took a painting, the one on the right, called Bringing in the Hay by a New Brunswick artist, J. Crawford Tom. And it had been in the lobby at Torresdale, and we moved it into the ballroom. And we took, since we have another empty space there, we took a third painting that was hanging in the ballroom, but in a different location, a little more secure and secluded location. It's called A Toast to the Bride by Friedrich Schröringer, an Austrian artist. And as you can see, it has one of those 19th century composition frames. So it's only going to be there until January of next year, when we bring in the Grand Canal scene from Venice and hang it there in its place. So we're kind of holding our breath, but I think, given that nothing's happened to a painting up in Torresdale, we think it's a good move for now. So that's how we're taking the two paintings out of the McMichael room and putting them in two different clubhouses, if you will. Okay. All right. Now, in the lobby at Torresdale, where Bringing the Hay was hanging on this wall, we thought we needed something else. So we had no sculpture up there. So we thought, what better person than Abraham Lincoln? So this is a bust of Abraham Lincoln that was done by Agnes Yarnall from an old Philadelphia Quaker family. She was married to a Union League member named Lawrence Lepage, who at one point was the president of the Franklin Institute. This is back in the 50s and the 60s. And the League purchased this bust from her in 1991. And at the time, she donated a 39-piece set of bronzes, all civil related, which are now in the League house on Broad Street. So we thought, and as you can see, it's a really marvelous image of Lincoln, but more, I love the style. It's called the additive style because it was originally done in clay and then bronzed. So that is where Abraham Lincoln now resides at Torresdale. So now here is On the Field of Honor by Francois Flameng. So it went back from Torresdale back to the League house, specifically into the old cafe. Now, as you can see, if you look to the far right, to the right of the door frame, you can see Harvest Home by Joseph John. So that's the hallway. So, and this painting actually hung here once upon a time before it was moved to Torresdale. But after we moved to Torresdale, we had to replace it with something else. And what did we have in its place? This painting that you see on the left-hand side. It's called The Battle of Louan-Poupry by the French military artist Paul Grosleron. And this painting depicts the French army in the Franco-Prussian War of 1877. And as you can see, they're not doing very well. And eventually the French would lose that war itself. Magnificent painting. I mean, you can hear the musket fire. And you can see the smoke that he has coming out of the muzzles of the muskets. Just wonderful stuff. And Gros Laurent would become Don Troiani's kind of artistic mentor when he was developing his skills as a military artist. Of course, Troiani did the 3 Medals of Honor in the Broad Street hallway. So you can see how art connects over generations and centuries even. So the Gros Laurent is now hanging in the restaurant in the lodge, just connected to the summit up at Liberty Hill. And on the right hand, it's actually the dining room is called Marquis by Denis Santiago. And the Marquis, of course, refers to the Marquis de Lafayette, who led the woefully outnumbered American forces at the Battle of Baron Hill when it took place. Part of it took place on the property that is now part of Liberty Hill Golf Club itself. So, and on the right-hand side, we have a different perspective of that painting on the wall. And you can see it's a big wall, and it got a big painting. So the painting itself is only 4 feet by 3 feet. So, and you always measure paintings by height versus width. So 4 feet high, 3 feet wide, but you add in that beautiful 19th century composition frame, and now it becomes a 6 foot by 4.5 to 5 foot painting. So it really works well on that wall. It just pops on that wall, and it's great. All right, so what do we do next? All right, so this is the lobby to the lodge where you can check in up to the right. As you can see, the lobby area is still under construction, so to speak, and certainly under design. But it's kind of neat to see it when it's in that condition. So here we have a large painting that was donated to the League recently by a member, George Torak, who was an art dealer. And George had this, and he thought it would make a wonderful addition to the collection up at Liberty Hill, and he was right. It was done by an American, actually a European expatriate artist named George Peter, who settled in the Philadelphia area. And this is his depiction of George Washington at Valley Forge, painted in 1920. And we thought, well, since we're doing George Washington, and this is Liberty Hill, and now keep in mind that there are 2 buildings at Liberty Hill. There is the lodge and the summit, which are the food and beverage, that is the restaurant operation, and then also the lodging and conferencing operation. And the theme for that is the Revolutionary War. And then you have the golf clubhouse, and the theme there will be the Civil War, and we'll get to there in a few minutes. So since we're still doing Revolutionary War, George Washington, we had this wonderful portrait bust of George Washington in the League House that was originally done by the French sculptor Houdon, Jean Houdon. And he went to Mount Vernon in 1785 and made a life mask of George Washington that he then turned or used to create this portrait bust of George Washington. That was then copied by the American sculptor William McDonald in 1898. And that's what you see here in the lobby to the right of the Washington painting at Valley Forge. They look like they were meant to go together all these years. And who would have thought that would work that well, but it did. So as you can see, looking off to the left, there's a wall over there behind that ladder. And of course, that wall is going to get filled. So let's take a look. All right, there you go. You can see it there. But first, we're back in Marquis, and we're looking above. We're about a half a floor above the floor of that lobby area. And you can look through these blinds, I guess you call them, and you can see the George Peter and the Washington portrait bust. So art is visible from all over. Now, here's the wall that we were just looking at. And here is that painting that I talked about earlier from the Torresdale Clubhouse, done by a League member, by the way, Augustus Goodyear Heaton. And this is the George Washington presenting Governor Dinwiddie's letter to the Chevalier de la Gardeau at Fort Le Boeuf. That's still a mouthful. And I hope you can tell that the painting's dark because it actually it takes place inside a log cabin. So there's no natural light except what's coming in through the door. But Washington is wearing a red coat. That is, he's an officer in the British Army, because this is a time when the British and the French were contesting the ownership of Western Pennsylvania, if you will. And so Washington was there as an emissary on behalf of the governor of Virginia, which of course is British. So, and what appropriate painting, because as it turns out, who would have thought that you would have George Washington in a painting as a British officer when during the Battle of Baron Hill, George Washington was the commander of the American forces themselves. So I think it's just great, a juxtaposition of using Washington in 2 different ways. So irony, I don't know. Anyway, good. It's the perfect painting on the perfect wall in the perfect place. So, all right. And here we have another painting we took from the League House that hadn't been seen in years because it had been in storage for a long time. And then the only wall big enough in the League House that could hold it was actually at the very top of the 15th Street stairwell on a landing between the 3rd and 4th floors. It is called Moonlight on the Pond by William Didier Pouget, another French artist. And it too is big. It's 6 feet tall, but by 9 feet wide. And because it is moonlight, of course, it's dark. But by hanging on such a low wall, it has enough light that you can actually get to appreciate the painting itself. And you can see the brush strokes, and you can see the pond. And actually, in person, it looks fantastic. So here's another depiction of it. And there's Joe, our librarian. All right. You get some idea now what the painting looks like on the right. Okay, you can see it now up closer, if you will. So it pops a little bit more. All right, so that's that. So next, we move to the lobby of the golf clubhouse, which is a separate building. And this is going to be Civil War themed. And so we thought the first thing somebody should see when they walk in is Abraham Lincoln. And the Legacy Foundation was recently presented with this bust of Abraham Lincoln by Catherine Weigley, who's the daughter of Dr. Russell Weigley, who for years and years and years, for decades, taught American history, but specifically Civil War history at Temple University. And for those decades, the 1970s to the 1990s, he was the foremost expert on Civil War history in Philadelphia and spoke to the League on numerous occasions as well on Civil War topics. And in 2001, for a book he published on the history of the Civil War, he was given the Gilder Lehrman Lincoln Prize through the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. And their prize is actually a bust of Abraham Lincoln that was taken from a life-size sculpture of Lincoln called Lincoln the Man, or the Standing Lincoln, done by the French sculptor Saint Gaudens. And so this is the actual Lincoln Award that was given to Dr. Weigley. Dr. Weigley regretfully, very regretfully, and his wife have both passed on. And Catherine wanted this bronze bust to find a good home. And what better home than the Union League? And we found a very good home for it at Liberty Hill. So it's right in the lobby when you walk in. And then in the dining room, appropriately called Grays, after the Washington Grays, after the 1st Regiment Infantry Washington Grays, whose infantry sculpture stands on Broad Street to the south side of the building, we added 3 Civil War portraits. So the first one, the fireplace, is of, obviously you can tell, U.S. Grant. Now we had 3 Grant portraits in the League House, and we don't need 3 Grant portraits in the League House, so we brought this one up to Liberty Hill. This was done, shucks, I'm having my first senior moment. Anthony Lamore, who another expatriate European artist who settled in Philadelphia. And while he was in Philadelphia painting, there was a photographer named Frederick Gudekunst, who was the foremost photographer in Philadelphia in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and a Union League member, by the way. And this is based on a photograph that Gudekunst took of Grant at Army headquarters in April of 1865, right after Lincoln had been assassinated. What Lamore did not paint into the portrait is a mourning ribbon that Grant had wrapped around the upper left sleeve of his uniform, but it's in the photograph, which is really neat to see. So anyway, so that's a good size painting. It's maybe 5 feet by 3.5, 4 feet wide. So it's got a big wall and a big fireplace above it, or firewall, if you will, or chimney piece as they are called. But it looks very nice there right now. And then off to the right, we have Captain Benjamin Davis, who was from Boston, a Massachusetts regiment. And then here we have a scene of both Grant and Davis again. And then on the opposite wall from them, we have Lieutenant Charles Merriman, the gentleman from the 23rd Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. And Merriman would lose his life at the Battle of Laurel Hill in 1864. So they kind of round out our paintings in the restaurant, at least at this point in time. So wasn't that interesting to see? So what better way to end a talk about moving paintings around than a ladder and a blank wall that is going to be filled with something at some point in time. So it was challenging. And now we were wondering how to solve all these different painting puzzles, if you will. So as I said earlier, there's got to be room for one more, and sure enough, we had lots of room for plenty more. And so stay tuned. No doubt, after we hang Lucretia Mott in her appropriate place in January of 2023 in the Broad Street hallway, we'll move some more paintings around, and maybe we'll come back and revisit the whole issue again. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's always a pleasure to bring them to you. And I hope you've been watching for the last couple of years, because we've had a lot of fun doing these. We appreciate your patronage and your interest, and we hope we'll see you in 2 weeks when we do our next episode of Mondays with Mundy. So in the meantime, stay well, take care, and be safe. Goodbye.